I really appreciate you taking the time. I read through your book, and what an amazing journey. I mean, when you started out, all those years ago, right, as a young kid in Cuba, like, did you ever fathom that your life would take anything even remotely close to where it ended up?
No, as a matter of fact, that was a long drive yesterday, and I was thinking exactly about that. That here I am, at age 8, happy, horse, BB gun, running around, having a great time. The next thing I know, I'm on an airplane by myself to go to an orphanage in Pueblo, Colorado. And lo and behold, I retired as a senior CIA operations officer with a good track record. So no, there isn't a day that I don't pinch myself. There really isn't a day I don't pinch myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's your story might be one of the most inspirational stories that I've ever read. And is there another place in the world where that's even possible?
No, I think that that's what the American dream is all about. I mean,
Right.
if you were willing, yeah, first of all, I believe that God puts a path in front of us. And if we have the courage to pay the price of a mission, you will have an interesting life, let's put it that way. But no, I think that there's a lot of countries where this would have not worked. I would have been marginated, or it would have been a caste system. Who knows? But for me, it is literally the base for my life.
Yeah, maybe, the only other place that I could think of it even being possible would be Europe, maybe, but I feel like the chances, as great as they were stacked against you, even here, I feel like they would be even greater over there. So like it's even less likely to take place, in Europe.
Yeah, well, as a community, the Cubans has assimilated very quickly. I think that that's one of the things that distinguish us from the rest. When my parents came over about 8 months after I left, shortly as soon as my dad got a job, he came home and says, "We're not going back to Cuba.
Hmm.
So we're staying. We got an opportunity to live in this country. We're going to make the best," because we came legally. I mean, we had visas and we were all refugees.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that, right? Like, why don't we start there? What was the situation in Cuba that your family was fleeing from, right? And how did that process even look like? Because so I'm a new dad, right? I guess not a new dad anymore, right? I have a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, but I'm at the very beginning of that section of my life, and I couldn't even fathom sending my kids somewhere and I'm not with them and just saying, "I'll find you." I mean, that's not even like a possibility in my brain.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. When my oldest son turned 10, I looked at my wife and I asked her, I said, "Do you think that I would have the stones to do what my dad did?" And she said, "Over my dead body." But the painted the picture. I mean, I lived an idyllic life at the age of 8, 9. I had a horse before I had a bicycle. I had a BB gun when I was 6. My dad used to take me on trips into the mountains when he went to buy coffee or sell coffee. He had a roasting company. The first sign of violence was around 1958 because Castro took over in 59. So late 58, they hit the town that we lived in, which is the foothills of the Escambray Mountains, where Che Guevara was running the show there. And I saw my first firefight literally, 15 yards in front of me, except for there was a guy right by the pit window that I didn't see. So it was more like 3 feet in front of me. That changed, and that was I don't want to say traumatic, even though there were bodies laying around, people getting shot at. But what was really eye opening was how quickly our world changed. Within 6 months, they had confiscated my dad's business. My dad employed maybe 10 guys, and he built every single machine in that roasting company. So when they confiscated it 6 months later, it went out of business because they couldn't fix it. Almost immediately, I'm talking within a month of them taking over, I was wearing a uniform to go to school.
Wow.
And you had different colors for different, bandanas for different groups or whatever, because I was about 9. Yeah, about 9. I was sent to campesinos' homes, farmers' homes, peasants' homes to teach them how to read and write, 8 or 9 years old, you know. But it was just part of that brainwashing. I think that the deepest example that I can give you is they would literally tell us that if we heard one of our parents speak ill of Castro or the revolution, that it was our patriotic duty to report them. And kids did.
Man.
And the consequences were dire. So I went from that to my dad right after the Bay of Pigs. When the Bay of Pigs went south, my dad's hopes were shattered. And he said, "That's it, we're leaving." Even though we were already contemplating because he had lost his business. He still had a little bit of money, but there's a deal in Cuba that when you register yourself to leave the country under Castro, they confiscated every single item in your house. They would come in, they would do inventory. If you had silverware that was wasn't there when it was time to go, you could not leave. And my dad had a 57 Pontiac, a Jeep, and a deuce and a half. And that was part of the problem. The infighting in town about who was going to get what was delaying and delaying and delaying. And that's why I came out by myself with a program called Peter Pan through the Catholic Church. And I ended up in the Sacred Heart Orphanage in Pueblo, Colorado. So, you go from idyllic life to seeing that kind of violence, headed to the airport. I remember in the main avenue there towards the airport, there were 3 guys hanging from trees by the neck with signs around that said counter-revolutionaries. I remember I was in the back seat and my mom tried to jump back and cover my eyes, but it was a little too late. I had seen it. Then getting on the airplane, you mentioned something about I will find you. I was having hesitation because my mom was having a nervous breakdown. You could only imagine that. I was a parent. And my dad, I'll never forget it. He took a knee, he put his hand on my right shoulder and says, "I will see you again." And my dad was a cowboy before he was a businessman, and that's the way he brought me up. What a man is supposed to be like, the backbone. How do you behave to be stoic to the degree possible? So I got on that plane, and I remember leaving what they called the fish bowl because it was all glassed in. My parents were on the other side, but talk about a shock. I don't remember anything after that. I don't getting on the plane, where I sat. My conscience begins when I got out of the airport in Miami, and there was a priest waiting for me and 3 other kids that were on board. The rest was just totally blacked. I blocked that all out. I guess I was scared.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's incomprehensible to even start with imagining that kind of fear where it blocks out a memory, like that's crazy. That's just now that I'm a parent, it's just like, it's such an incomprehensible thing to even think about. I mean, I got choked up when I was reading your book. I had put the audiobook on pause because I was like, I couldn't even fathom it. So how did your father find you? Did he like stay in contact with that priest? And there was like an arrangement where like, hey, he'll be here until you get here, and at a certain time period, like maybe you go somewhere else or whatever, but that priest would keep track of you. And
the program was called Peter Pan, Pedro Pan program, and they were by the Catholic Church, so they were very well structured. They kept tabs on the kids. There was no communication with the parents because they were in Cuba, and that was almost impossible. But as soon as they would get to the United States, they had been told, call this number, and they call that number. And then it took about 30 days to clear, make sure that they had a place to go to live before they send me back. But it was, it was dead space. I never spoke to my parents during those months. And I'll never forget it. I was playing basketball after dinner, and one of the nuns came out and told me to come in. So I ran to the nun, and when she took me to the office, and I'll never forget it, it was a black phone and the handle was off of it. And I pick up the phone and it was my dad.
Wow, that's amazing. So to fast forward, you basically went through what sounded like, high school, grade school, high school time frame, and then you found yourself in the military, right? I don't want to like fast forward or butcher your story in any way, right? I'm trying to, I guess, maybe get to the interesting